Welcome to the Apocalyptic Supperclub, where I serve up stories to whet the appetite for the politically possible and nourish our capacity to show up more fully in a drastically changing world. I am your host, Christine Barrington.
Remember that even when we disagree, we must always strive to engage with understanding and respect. It is through this kind of collaboration that we will truly make a difference on the state of New Hampshire and how we move forward.
Sherman Packard, the Republican senator of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, stood on the dais in December of 2024 to mark that body's courageous commitment to build structures for diffusing political conflict while doing their state's business. The program they successfully followed to achieve that aim was inspired and facilitated by Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan volunteer-led movement that seeks to bridge the political divide and strengthen our democratic republic through building what should be a basic skill: the ability to disagree respectfully and stay connected despite differences. They call this capacity courageous citizenship, and Braver Angels insists that on the eve of our nation's 250th anniversary, we must accept our responsibility to bring humility, courage, and persistence to the work of building trust and strengthening the bonds of citizenship, despite our enduring differences. How they do it and the program they offer to help you do it too is the subject of this episode of the Apocalyptic Supperclub. Political division is a major force in American culture today, and yet the vast majority of Americans express exhaustion and frustration with this reality. Here is New Hampshire Representative Eric Turer.
When I was running from door to door in my town, I would hear people say, "What are you going to do about the divide?" And the two things I heard was, "We're tired of it, it's hurting our community." And the other thing I heard was, "What are you, if you get elected, going to do about it?"
What are we going to do about it? Colin Woodard, in his book American Nations, asserts that America is not one nation, but rather it is made up of 11 distinct nations, each with its own unique historical roots, values, and worldviews. 11 different cultures, in other words. So how are we going to get along? I mean, really? Especially when we have political players who are working hard to play up those differences and inspire rancor between us for their own purposes. Finding this way forward is the Braver Angels way, and it is not easy. If it were, we'd be doing it already. Learning how to stay in connection despite disagreements is hard, but there is much to be gained if we can achieve it, and much to lose if we fail. Some 50% of Americans believe they will see civil war within their lifetimes, while many political scientists and historians argue that the Civil War rhetoric is an exaggeration fueled by media sensationalism. Political violence is clearly rising. We are feeling threatened. Our sense of safety and trust in the American experiment is in disarray, and more, we are blaming each other.
Somehow, in the last 20 years, we got to a point where we personalized it. And this is the concern that we have. It's not about whether we agree or not. Disagree, that's fine. But because somebody doesn't agree with you, that doesn't mean they're stupid or an idiot or not a patriot. This is what we're trying to overcome in Braver Angels.
That was Douglas Teschner, co-author of Beyond the Politics of Contempt, and a Republican who played a key role in the New Hampshire legislative project that spanned 3 years, involved hundreds of representatives in both online and live workshops, and resulted in their bipartisan caucus whose charter it is to pre-clear controversial bills by meeting to discuss the underlying values of a bill before it reaches a public hearing, with the goal of removing poison pill language that would otherwise trigger a partisan brawl. Not the stuff of headlines, but an incredibly valuable model to follow given the deterioration of our political culture. Inspired by this achievement, which is part of their Braver Politics initiative, I wanted to know more. So I reached out to Braver Angels to discover their origin story and learn about their ground game, which is largely comprised of individuals who are seeking a way forward towards a more perfect union. People like Gabriella Kearns, a young woman who was once a Braver Angels volunteer and is now their Director of Communications.
My name is Gabby Kearns. I am the Director of Communications for Braver Angels. I've been with Braver Angels since around 2021, 2022. It's been quite the journey. My initial interest in Braver Angels really sprung out of personal experience. I'm from Michigan originally, which is notable swing state. And I'm from a swing county in the swing state. So it's one of those counties that when everyone's watching the election results come in, it's always one of those consequential counties that we're looking at to see where it's swinging. And so just very organically, I have people in my life that are all across the political spectrum. So I have a very natural entry point into this work.
It looks like you've been pretty politically engaged in your life. You've canvassed, you've really engaged a lot. Can you speak to that just a little bit about your passion for being involved politically?
Oh, absolutely. So my background, my first job out of college was in media. I worked at NBC News in New York. And again, first time ever living out of the state of Michigan. I went to Michigan State and then immediately went to work at NBC and 30 Rock in New York City. So it was a big change. And I just remember being there and feeling like I know what's going on in the news because, again, I was in it every single day. I could tell you what all the headlines were. I could tell you the latest things happening. But I just started having this curiosity about what do people actually think about it? And I would talk to my friends and family members. And I just sometimes felt like there was that difference. I'm talking in 2017. So again, right around Trump's first term. And so I often felt like, what was being said in the media as someone who was a part of it and what people actually felt about it, there was a bit of a difference there. There was a gap there. And so I got an interest in what does it actually look like to be working on the ground in politics and to be in the grassroots and really talking to people day in and day out. And so when COVID hit, that was kind of a great opportunity. We were approaching another election, the 2020 election. And I, at that point, because of COVID, because of the pandemic, had moved back to Michigan. So here I was back in my swing state leading up to a presidential election. That was kind of the best opportunity to start talking to voters and see, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And so I did something called deep canvassing, which is different than regular canvassing. I think when a lot of people hear canvassing, they hear like, get out the vote. It's kind of a quick interaction of getting people registered and all of that. But what I was doing was talking to undecided voters in Michigan and trying to talk to them about voting for Joe Biden specifically. So I was working for the Democrats. I was working for the blue side, as we would say in Braver Angels. And we had a whole conversation that we'd had with people. And if people kind of said, yeah, I'm struggling with this vote, I don't know what to do, I'm undecided, whatever, we'd really talk them through the decision and try to convince them that voting for Joe Biden was the best decision that they had in front of them. I mean, again, Braver Angels were open about our partisan leanings, and so that's totally fine. I felt good, again, as a blue who really wanted Biden to win in that election. I felt good to kind of channel my energy somewhere that felt helpful for me. I was pretty anxious at that point. But the most interesting thing for me through those conversations was that more than anything, I found, firstly, just talking to people, talking to fellow Americans, so interesting, hearing their stories. And the thing I kept hearing come up over and over and over again, doesn't matter if they're blue, red, undecided, anything, was I no longer talk to my sister anymore because of politics, or my best friend and I, our relationships completely changed because we're voting for two different people. And even though I am political, I am partisan, I do lean one way, as helpful as it was for me at that point in my life to really be advocating for one side, I felt like, what can I do to actually bring the two sides together? I found that piece of it so much more interesting. So that was where I kind of found Braver Angels.
I love hearing that. I'm really passionate about the same thing, and a lot of the organizations that I'm reaching out to also share this value. So later we're going to get into the programs and the resources that Braver Angels offer, which are quite vast. But right now, could you please introduce to our listeners a bit of the history of how Braver Angels came into being?
Definitely. So I like to say Braver Angels began with a phone call. We have 3 co-founders. 2 of them are named David. So we have David, and Bill. David Blankenhorn was living in Manhattan at the time. And so it was right after the 2016 election. He was living in Manhattan. He doesn't lean one way or the other too far, but everyone around him was quite blue and they were really upset about the election. And so he called an old friend of his, David Lapp, who leans red. And David Lapp's in Ohio. So David was like, DLAP, what do you think about the election? What do people where you live think about the election? Everyone around me has their hair on fire. They can't believe it. They're shocked. They're horrified. There's this tremendous reaction to the election of Donald Trump in New York City. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And David Lapp, who again was in Ohio, was saying, oh, the complete opposite. People aren't surprised. They voted for him. We're happy. Yeah, we're feeling pretty good. And so really the conclusion between the two friends were, isn't it crazy that we live in the same country and we're having such different experiences of this one election and this reaction to this one person? And so David Blankenhorn, was getting his gears shifting, and it was like, okay, so what would it look like to bring the people that I'm seeing in my life, the blues in my life, in a room with the reds in your life? What would that look like to bring reds and blues together after this election to really hear each other's side out? Because clearly we're just existing in different worlds right now. And so they started getting really excited about this idea. Again, it was super organic. Like, can we get 10 reds and 10 blues just in a room together? And so they started talking to their third friend, Bill Doherty, who is a renowned marriage and family therapist. And so they're like, Bill, we got this great idea. We're going to get reds and blues together in a room to talk about the 2016 election. And he was like, you cannot do that. That's an awful idea. And his reasoning was like, this is like one of the most contentious, emotional elections in recent history. And you can't just throw people in a room together without any structure and say, okay, now talk. That's just bound to go poorly. And so they were like, okay, so Bill, can you create structure? You're good at this. Bill's specialty is working with couples on the brink of divorce. So he has a lot of experience in working with two sides that have very different perspectives of what's going on and getting them to see each other's perspective. Bill's kind of a person who under promises, over delivers. So he was like, we'll see what I can kind of come up with. And then 48 hours later, it turns around the Red Blue Workshop, which is our premier workshop. Initially, it was a weekend workshop. Over that weekend that they did it, it was just lightning in a bottle. And they were like, this is extremely special. They actually ended up going on and taking workshops on the road and doing a whole bus tour throughout the United States. So it grew from there. But that's how that first workshop came to be.
Gabby, I remember people reacting to the 2016 election like it was a death and a betrayal. So to respond with curiosity in the face of such a shock is certainly a high skill. And bless all those people who wanted to get into that room together at that time. Many did not, and many more today absolutely do not want to talk to those who support what they see as extremism. So to move past that reluctance or even revulsion to try to connect across the divide is courageous, which brings us to the Braver Angels mission statement. They use a phrase which captivated me, and they call it courageous citizenship. What's that about?
We want people to really step into this role of the citizen. Again, we like to say, sometimes people feel like polarization is something that happens to us like it's the weather. It's out of our control. It's nothing that we can do about it. But the fact is, no, each of us plays a role. And no matter where you fall on the rung of society, you are a citizen or maybe pursuing citizenship. You are a person living within this country that has a role to play. So that's really what we're trying to drive forward with that point, that you have a role to play in this country. And then courageous, because these conversations take bravery. They're hard. Frankly, I think a lot of how things have been framed, you see people yelling at each other, and it's like somehow yelling at each other, that's seen as brave or courageous. That's not courage. That's letting your emotions get the best of you. That's not hearing out your fellow citizen or your fellow man or woman. So we really want to drive home that point that this takes courage, that this is hard work. And this sometimes, frankly, it's about working against our own initial instincts. You might get heated right away, and then you say, okay, no, I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to take a beat and I'm going to do the courageous thing, which is hear this person out or ask a question of curiosity or whatever that next step is.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if we have enough big-heartedness to weave healing into this national fissuring. I will say it's no coincidence that a marriage therapist was so key in putting an effective program together, because a nation is a collection of relationships. A healthy nation comes from healthy relationships, but relating can be so hard. I am trained in psychotherapy, and relational therapy offers guardrails and tools to navigate around our desire to throttle the one we say we love. So let's talk about some of the starting guidelines offered by Braver Angels. They are called the Braver Angels Way. I'm going to read each one and let you respond, all right? So here we go. Number 1. We state our views freely and fully without fear.
So it's our number one principle for a reason, because it's really at the core of all of our work. I mean, this is not just something we do in our workshops. This is something we do in our staff meetings. This is something we do when we're working together on a website or on a project or whatever it is. This is such a core of what we do, is that we state our views freely and fully and without fear. Whenever I talk to people about Braver Angels and they hear this is a space where we really let anyone share what they believe, their initial instinct is, oh, you must hear the worst things. And it's like, no, because we start from a place of openness and we start from a place of curiosity, and we want to hear what you have to say, and what you have to say matters to us. People really do rise to the occasion. People will start to lash out if they feel immediately like closed doors, we don't want to hear what you have to say. That's when people start saying things that frankly they might not even mean. I've done this myself, or suddenly I'm arguing for a position I don't even believe in just because I feel like someone doesn't want me to say something. And then suddenly I'm getting defensive. So this is just really an opportunity to let us all bring our guards down and just really say what we believe. It makes hard conversations easier, because anytime we have to say something, we can say, in the spirit of the Brave Angels way, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I believe. This is what I think. And it's just a constant reminder that we're all here for that reason, to really say what we believe and to hear each other out. So that's our first principle.
All right, thank you. Second principle, we treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. But actually, I will say, initially it was just honesty and respect, and we added dignity, and we really wanted that word added in there. Because again, it's just that reminder that even if our views are so far apart, this is another person. And this is another person that lives in this country and probably loves this country and has a passion for the United States and wants us to be in a good place, even if we're so far apart. It's just so important.
Yeah, this is a very sincere approach, and it's touching. It really is. And I also have to say, just playing devil's advocate here, that there are truly some bad actors out there who enjoy baiting people and stirring them up. So we do need to practice discernment and be kind of ninja about who we talk to. But still, having the desire to build the ability to engage in this way is valuable, and there are so many people worth engaging with, which brings us to principle number 3. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, again, this sounds obvious, but it's about not closing ourselves off when we hear that different opinion. And actually, my favorite place to see this principle in action, this idea of welcoming opportunities to engage with those with whom we disagree, is at our conventions. So we have conventions every other year. And our last convention, we had around 750 people. It's always equally balanced, red and blue. And everyone will wear a lanyard. And so we've red, blue, other. So some people don't lean red or blue. And then we do have exempt for some folks that maybe you're a priest, or maybe you have some type of occupation that you can't divulge your political leaning. But for the vast majority of it, it's red and blue, equally divided. And it's really incredible. You see them in their lanyards, their red lanyards and their blue lanyards. Across the board, it is people from different political leanings talking to each other. And it's great because when you see another blue, again, speaking for myself, and you're like, I don't need to talk to you. I want to talk to that red over there. I want to see what that person thinks. So it's really that spirit of not just tolerating people and not just saying, okay, fine, I won't cut you out of my life for disagreeing, but it's really saying, I want to know what you think. I'm curious. Like, tell me, what do you think? And again, we hear about these relationships blossoming in Braver Angels all the time. So we have one-on-one conversations is one of our programs. And what will often happen is these two partners will have totally different perspectives, and they'll maintain that friendship beyond that one-on-one conversation. So then when something happens, when a big world event happens, they message each other and say, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you thinking? And they get to, again, welcome that opportunity to engage with each other. So again, it goes beyond tolerating, and it really goes to a spirit of openness and curiosity.
Let's take a moment to reintroduce the show. You are listening to the Apocalyptic Supperclub, serving up stories to whet the appetite for the politically possible. I am your host, Christine Barrington, and I am speaking with Gabriella Kearns of Braver Angels, an organization that seeks to heal the dynamics of political polarization. Coming up next, we dig deeper into what is called the Braver Angels Way, which challenges us to build resilient skills for navigating difficult political conversations. You are listening to the Apocalyptic Supperclub, and this is your host, Christine Barrington. The Washington Post recently reported that the United States was the only country in a worldwide survey to say that most of our fellow citizens are, quote, bad people. In America, the politics of contempt have reached Olympian levels, but our show today highlights one organization bold enough to take on the challenge of healing that divide. Braver Angels leans into the spirit of President Lincoln's first inaugural address when he urged us to remember the angels of our better nature because we are friends. We must not be enemies. And so in that spirit, let's return to my conversation with Braver Angels Gabriella Kearns as we explore the tenets of the Braver Angels way. Gabby, Principle 4 is a biggie. Personally, I felt called out by it. So here it is. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. Ouch. It's very challenging.
Yeah. I think this one's really about intellectual humility. Again, we think that we're coming in with full information, and it's just about reminding ourselves that we only have part of the story. And just as we think that someone is totally missing something that's so obvious to us, we're probably missing something that's obvious to them. This one's kind of an interesting one, even how I think about it in our work. So at the staff level for Braver Angels, at our leadership level, we pursue red-blue balance there. And so if we're working on a project, we'll have like a red leader and a blue leader working together on it. And what can often happen, frankly, especially, again, as a blue, is there might be common language that we use because that's a normal way to frame that. Even the word democracy can be seen as a more political word. A lot of conservatives say republic. There's these different things in language that when we're working together across political differences internally as a team, they'll say, well, if you say it that way, that's going to sound blue. As a blue, I don't think so. I think that's neutral. That's the beauty of when we have people in our spaces that disagree with us or have a different experience or different background, they can really show us what those blind spots are because we all have them. And I will say the second part of that is none of us are not worth talking to. And I think that can be a really hard one for people because there is such a desire to draw a line. And I feel like that's almost oftentimes our instinct, especially in this culture, is like, I need to figure out what the lines are. Even with the first principle, stating our views freely, fully, without fear, it's like, no, we need to start with what you can't say. But again, it's about going back to that spirit of trust and openness. And this person has a story, they have a perspective. Even if we disagree with them, even if it's offensive, frankly, like there could be value in understanding where they're coming from, or at least understanding how they got there. That can be helpful as well.
Understanding how they got there. Yeah, that's a good one because I'm thinking about a few people in my life who hold some pretty extreme views from my perspective. And I can see your point that it can be valuable at the very least to try to understand how they got to where they are. And I'm hearing this phrase, be curious, not furious, playing in my mind. I mean, it seems so much more valuable to hold curiosity as a form of protection rather than holding a line like a shield.
I'll say about that in the drawing the lines is it often doesn't do what we want it to do. Because again, just speaking candidly, some of it's really good intention. And again, I will say just bluntly, I do think a lot of that comes from the blue side. I think internally, Reds are more comfortable talking to people they disagree with. Because I think on the blue side, we feel we can't allow someone to say something that's offensive to someone else. It just kind of betrays our instincts in that way because we want to create a space where people feel comfortable. And what if they say something that could be hurtful to someone else? But I will say one thing that I've learned, again, I'm not saying agreeing with what they're saying, and I'm not saying everything's okay and it's an immediate sign off, but I'm saying when you're just open to hearing someone out, we are actually much more convincing of our own perspective than we would be otherwise. And I'll say Braver Angels is not here to persuade. That's a key part of our work, is that the purpose of these conversations is not to persuade. But let me just say as a disclaimer, like it is anti-persuasive when you go into a political conversation and someone feels like you're trying to push an opinion. If you're just open to what they're saying, they're going to be a lot more open to what you're saying.
Yeah, this is resonating for me. I mean, today things have become incredibly extreme because I believe bad players are deliberately trying to increase the fissures that had been building for some time because, broadly speaking, we as a people have not had skills navigating with curiosity around challenging and complex topics. I mean, I think we really, really struggle with complexity. It is a truth, though, that people will only hear you if they feel you are moving toward them. So we need to have the strength and resiliency to do this. Extreme sensitivity and reactivity is such a trap. It makes us inflexible, and inflexible things crack under pressure.
No, it's so true. And we don't want to keep these conversations fragile. I started the New York City Alliance for Braver Angels. And it was funny because, New York City is such a liberal city. We obviously lean blue. And yet when it came to engaging people to come to our debates, the New York Young Republicans Club were like, I'm there. I'm ready to get on stage. They were excited about it. Manhattan Young Democrats were much harder to get on board because the attitude was like, why would I engage with those people? Which I get it, that works in a liberal city, but we have to be able to talk to each other. And it's actually, again, if you are just being the most shrewd politician in the world, you should want to engage with people across the aisle. You should want to understand what they think. You should want to know what their best arguments are. And you should want to be able to build your own arguments, because if you're only used to making your arguments to people that agree with you, they're going to collapse in a second. So even if you have no goodwill, there's a reason for doing this, frankly.
Yeah, ultimately, building this kind of skillfulness can assist us in all areas of our life. So it's a worthwhile investment of effort. Perhaps it used to be possible to simply avoid these conversations, but today I am not so sure. Courageous citizenship is probably now necessary, which brings us to the next principle or skill. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes.
Yes. This is a big one because, again, where the last one was about intellectual humility, this is about almost intellectual discipline. This is about testing yourself. Does this pass my muster? Does this pass my own test? Do I believe what I'm saying right now? Do I believe that all Republicans feel X, Y, and Z way? Do I believe that all Democrats think this? It's inevitably not true. Again, if this was an exam that you were taking in college and you had to present your best case, that's not how you would frame it. You would know right away you're getting docked on that. So when we're talking to each other, being careful about how we frame things. And then also asking, Christine, I heard you say this. Is that right? Did you mean that, or did I misunderstand that? Again, it's almost like being scientific about it, because a lot of the times we're fighting phantoms. We're fighting people that don't actually exist, either because we projected something onto them that isn't actually there, or because we're just in such a toxic cycle with one another that we're bringing out the worst in each other.
Yes, and that is making me think of research that shows most of us just suffer from what is called a perception gap. The science shows that we believe the other side is about 30% more extreme than they actually are. I really don't know how they measured that exactly, but there you go. When you put people in a room and have them talk about their genuine experiences, it is easier to see that not only are they not a monster, they're valuable, they're precious. I've often had this experience in workshops. There really is something to be gained here, which brings us to Braver Angels' next principle. We look for common ground where it exists, and if possible, find ways to work together.
Yeah. I think this one's so important because, again, I think a lot of people will hear about Braver Angels and the first instinct is, oh, you're just trying to bring a bunch of moderates together and you're just trying to find agreement amongst a bunch of centrists. Not true. We do have a specific workshop called the Common Ground Workshop that we created for that specific space to find common ground. But in the rest of our work, that's never the main purpose of any of it. It's a nice byproduct. If you can find common ground, that's wonderful. And I think oftentimes people can. But if you can't, that doesn't mean that this doesn't work. What we talk about with this idea of polarization is there's ideological polarization, which means you and I might disagree on an issue. And then there's affective polarization, which is because you and I disagree on this issue, I now think you're fundamentally a threat. I think you're an enemy. I think you're bad for this country. It's that emotional component of the disagreement. And so, again, that's really the part of this work that we're trying to address is the emotional part of the disagreement. We're not just trying to get everyone to agree. So we do look for common ground where it exists. That's awesome. And then ideally, then we find ways to work together. But that's not always the main thing that we're trying to do.
Right. And just to reiterate, it's very humbling to understand that ideological polarization is quite intractable. We almost never are going to shift people's fundamental stances on things. It's possible, but it's not likely. Where many of us are finding that it is in our felt connection, our affective polarization can't be bridged. All right, so the next principle, we believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn.
This kind of goes back to the point of like all of us have blind spots. It's that we all have something to learn from each other. I think sometimes we'll come into conversations and think, I need to inform this person about why they're so wrong. And it's like, no, you have a side, you can share, but you also have a role to learn.
What, you mean it's not my job to inform somebody where they're going wrong? I swear that impulse is political catnip. It is so hard to let go of.
Yeah. And again, not to be so self-critical, but I do think it's worth examining. I think this can sometimes be harder for the blue side. I think we can instinctively want to say, oh, no, that term's outdated. Oh, ooh, that's actually offensive. But if that's our starting point, we're never going to get anywhere. And frankly, like, again, I just turned 30. There are ways that people frame things, and I know they're well-intended, that like my generation would never say it that way. It's just a different generational thing. It's maybe an outdated term or something like that. But if I know what they're saying and they're coming from a good place, I'm not going to jump in and be like, oh, excuse me. I think it really erodes the trust. And really, again, if we're doing anything, we're really trying to build trust here. And then frankly, also, I'll say for myself, sometimes I think, especially prior to Braver Angels, I didn't know what my moral obligation was in a political conversation. It isn't my moral obligation to correct what I think anyone else is saying that is wrong or offensive, and that's what I'm there to do. I think if that's like your starting point, again, it can make these conversations harder. So I think starting from a point of listening, then building trust. And then again, like we go back to first, like we state our views freely, fully, without fear. This isn't about like not saying what you believe, but really start with trust and getting on the same page with each other. And then you could say, hey, and just for the record, this is how I see it. And that you come from your own place and your own beliefs.
Thank you, Gabby, for going on that little adventure with me about the Braver Angels way. I noticed that you brought up opportunities for folks on the blue side to examine how we've been doing things, not because it is wrong, but because it doesn't work. It doesn't actually achieve the political movement that we are hoping for. Here at the Apocalyptic Supperclub, I see societal transformation being built on 3 areas of development. The internal, which is changing how we can personally think and feel. The communal, improving the quality of our community connections. And then strategic, taking more intelligent and strategic action. So we're looking for what's going to work inside, relationally, and strategically. So let's pivot in that direction and explore the impact of Braver Angels, because I know many people are really scared about what's happening in their country. The political environment has deteriorated in ways that are really dangerous, far beyond anything we experienced in Trump's first administration, and people are really looking for things that work. So what has been Braver Angels' impact around dealing with this changing reality?
The way I really see Braver Angels, and this frustrates a lot of people, frankly, but this is the way I see Braver Angels, and I think the way we see ourselves, is that we really are a vessel to bring people together in a communing space. And I think there's so often that people feel like there's a right and there's a wrong, and there's a stance that you need to take, and you need to stand up to certain things. So for example, we felt the heat during the 2020 election when Trump was saying that it was rigged and it was stolen and stop the count and all this stuff. And there were people internally that were like, listen, we need to speak out as an organization and we need to say that we disagree with this. But we have a policy of not doing that. Any person internally can say what they want and they can speak for themselves, always. But Brave Angels as the organization, what we're here to do is to bring people together with wildly different views and to bring them together in one space. And so if we start drawing lines, which again, I think in this political climate is so tempting and so instinctive, is that we need to all draw lines about where we stand and we need to be really vocal about it. I understand it. I feel it personally. I get it. And also, if Brave Angels does that, we completely undermine ourselves. We undermine what we're trying to do. We undermine our mission, and we undermine our ability to make any impact in this country because we start excluding people and we start saying like, you can be Republican, you just couldn't have voted for Trump. Or you maybe could have voted for Trump, you just can't believe that the election was stolen. And once we start drawing those lines, we're getting a smaller and smaller amount of the population. We're really here to bring people together to say what they believe honestly and then have them hear each other out. And again, I think that can be frustrating for a lot of people because maybe it feels insufficient. One thing I will say on that point is action is a part of our work. It's something that we're kind of ramping into more. Actually, when you were saying how you think of the show, it really was reminding me of how we're starting to orient ourselves so that we talk about our work on the personal level, the community level, the national level. And so on the personal level, we say act and not react. And we have a lot of wonderful skill building workshops for that. On the community level, we say act together locally. And we have some wonderful convening workshops. We're doing really great work, frankly, on immigration, which is obviously such a big issue right now in our country, everything we're seeing right now. We're bringing people together who disagree on that, and we're bringing them together with our elected leaders. And so that's the third pillar is at the national level, act for the health of the American society. And that's really about collaborative action and bringing people together. Because again, if we started drawing those lines in the ways that people want us to, we just wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing now. Again, in the 2020 election, the way we responded to the disagreement was that we had a debate about it, which also really pissed off a lot of people because then it was like, how can you have a debate about something that's not true? But what we call our debates are collective searches for the truth. There's space for people to share what they believe honestly. And so if we had drawn a line then, we could have never been doing the work that we're doing, for example, on immigration now, where we're bringing together people who are hardliners on immigration together with people who, in some cases, are dreamers themselves. There's people on such widely different ends of the spectrum who have such different experiences with it, but we're able to bring them together and bring them together in one room to have progress for them because we never drew those lines that people wanted us to.
What I think of when you describe holding that challenging space is that it's kind of like a grinding political empathy gym.
Yes. And so I started the New York City Alliance, and we had these debates at Comedy Cellar, which, if you know Comedy Cellar, it's kind of this legendary comedy club. And so we have these debates there. And I said, the one through line in all of these debates is that at some point I want to throw up. Like at some point I hear something that is so stressful. And then I'm in my head and I'm like, ugh, not do I hate what this person just said? I think I so disagree, but I also brought them here. I also invited them to speak on stage, and also I'm responsible for convening. You can get so in your head, and then you ride it out, and then you're like, whew, okay, I survived it. But exactly to your point, like this is not supposed to be easy. Like, trust me, I feel the exact same way. It's not that you get rid of the stomach ache, is that you get better at stomaching the stomach ache. That's what it is.
Yeah, to do this work, we almost have to become a different person, right? Like build a new identity because this goes against instinct. Carl Jung used to say that to develop fully was literally a work against nature. What is required actually feels totally taboo, but it draws us into new worlds. To be like this changes the whole social ecosystem. And in ecosystems, the greater the complexity, the greater the resiliency. Tolerating ambiguity means tolerating complexity. So when you were trying to clarify the role of Braver Angels, that it's seeking to build bridges and not draw lines, it reminded me of this idea that in an ecosystem, there is a very appropriate place for fire, and then there's a powerful role for water. They are different, and you don't ask the water to be fire, and you don't ask the fire to be water. You just let those elements of the ecosystem work their magic.
I love that.
There's magic in both, yeah.
I love that. There was a class I had, the professor talked about the productive zone of disequilibrium, where if you think about it on a chart, sometimes we're conflict avoidant and that's too cold. And then suddenly, because we don't know how to have productive disagreement, it goes super hot and it goes totally off the rails. And it's about staying warm and where you can feel uncomfortable, as we were saying earlier. It's not cozy, you're feeling kind of weird, but you're able to stay in the conversation and ride it out. So I love that. The water and fire analogy is a great one.
This is the Apocalyptic Supperclub, where I serve up stories to nourish our capacity to embrace the politically possible. I am your host, Christine Barrington, and we are exploring the ways Braver Angels is working to bridge and heal political polarization. Coming up next, we explore the resources and tools they offer to increase resiliency in the face of challenging political conversations. So, Gabby, we've explored some of the history and fundamentals of the Braver Angels' way of transforming political outrage into healing connection. If folks who are listening feel so inspired to start a journey with Braver Angels, where should they begin?
Well, there's many different starting points depending on who you are, where you're at. That's the beauty, the blessing, and sometimes the curse of Braver Angels, that we have so much going on. So I'll name maybe a couple different starting points. If this was me and I was just starting out, what would I start with? One, I would look locally, look at our website, and we have all of our alliances up there. We have well over 100 alliances across the country that are doing this work. So that's one thing I would do immediately, is get plugged in locally, see what's happening on the ground. Again, in my case, in New York City, we would have debates, we would have workshops, things going on that people could volunteer to be a part of. They could be a participant. They could also be an observer. If, like, let's say maybe there's a debate going on locally and you don't necessarily want to jump in, but you want to help put it together, or you want to just observe, that's a great starting point. So one, checking locally. But again, over 100 alliances across the country doesn't mean that we have an alliance in every city. And if you want to make one, that's another option. But if you're just trying to dip your toe in the water, another great option is our one-on-one conversations. I mentioned it earlier, where you get paired up with someone across the aisle. So we have a couple of different ways that we define it. So the most obvious is red-blue. Again, you can choose what kind of conversation you want to have. So if you're blue and you want to talk to a red, that's an option. You'll get paired with someone. You could also do a generational divide if maybe you're younger and you want to talk to someone older, or urban-rural divide. If you're living in a city and you want to talk to someone more in the country, there's all these different starting points for those conversations. We also have Israel-Palestine, so you can talk across that divide of that particular issue. So one-on-one conversations are great. I think 98% of participants find common ground with their one-on-one partner. And honestly, I've heard so many positive stories about people who stayed in touch with their partner for like 5 years, 7 years, that stay in touch with their partners over many years and continue to learn from them. So that's a great option, the one-on-one conversations.
So if you want to do a one-on-one conversation, does Braver Angels set it up, or do they just give you guidance to do it yourself?
So you sign up and you say what your leaning is, and then on our back end, we pair you with someone. And then we have a playbook that you follow for the conversation. So there's some structure. I'll say that's the beauty of Braver Angels work throughout, is that we always have some level of structure or guardrails. In our workshops, we have moderators. In our one-on-one conversations, we have some guided discussion. That's really what keeps the conversation on track and on the rails while still being able to be honest. So if you go to our website and you go to experience in the toolbar, set up a one-on-one conversation is one of the options. So that's a great next step. And then third, sometimes there are folks that are like, I'm not ready to talk to someone, or I'm shy, or I just want to do something on my own time. We also have e-courses. So one really great option is like the Family and Politics e-course. If that's like maybe you have a lot of disagreement in your family, there's a lot of great information in that. So we have skills for bridging the divide, depolarizing within, family and politics, skills for social media. There's a lot of great e-courses, and you can take them on your own time. So if that's just, again, you're just trying to dip your toe in the water. And then lastly, I will make a plug for our convention. We have our convention coming up in June 25th to 28th. It's going to be at Temple University in Philadelphia. You would be surprised how many people come to the convention as their first Braver Angels activity. There's a ton of people who do that. And it's fun. And you meet a ton of different people. It's 4 days and it's an intense introduction to Braver Angels, but we're doing it right around the 250th anniversary of our country. We're going to be in Philadelphia. It's going to be super meaningful. So if you're around or inspired, we'd truly love to have you.
The convention does sound compelling because everyone is held together with support and in a strong container. That's not a bad way to start at all. And I also saw that you have what is called an AI dojo, a chatbot training simulator. Can you please tell us about that? I found it really intriguing.
Yeah, so the dojo is a ton of fun. And yes, it's for members only, but I really, really recommend it. And I should just mention, membership is $12 a year. So it's just $1 a month. We want to make it accessible for folks. So what will happen is once you're signed up and you're a member and you're good, is that you're able to choose from different personas. So maybe you're conservative and your daughter is super progressive, and there's like a super progressive persona there. It's an AI chatbot, but they have the coding of someone that has particular views. They might speak a certain way. They might be from a certain part of the country, have a certain education level. There's all of this information that goes into that chatbot. And you can start communicating with it and practice conversations. And then on the side, you'll get some feedback on, that was a great question, or have you thought about reframing it like that? So we have also in real time, as you're having this conversation, some guidance to kind of help you think it through. I mean, even for my job, being in comms, like I can talk to different chatbots and be like, what do you think about us framing it this way? And they'll give different perspectives. So for me, it's great. I get an automatic focus group at all times. Frankly, a lot of people come to Brave Angels because maybe they live in a bubble and they don't know anyone outside of it. So that can be another great use of just trying to think of what would someone with this perspective, what might they say? And, of course, it's not perfect. It's AI and all of that. It's not human, but it can be a great starting point. And the feedback aspect is really, really helpful.
I was quite intrigued with this AI dojo, so I decided to take a plunge. In the martial arts world, a dojo is a place of the way, a dedicated ground where you cultivate discipline, refine your practice, and prepare your mind for the challenges outside its walls. When you enter the Braver Angels dojo, you are taken to a page with AI-generated personas that hold political beliefs that are based on Pew Research into political typologies. I have to say that going in, I was impressed. These personas are skillfully created with a photo and a fairly complete biography of their education, professional background, the types of news they consume, and which cultural influencers they follow. On the surface, they feel so entirely real that just reading through them and preparing to engage set my stomach churning, like I was about to meet and speak with a genuine stranger about charged issues. Some of the persona types include populist right, stressed sideliners, establishment liberals, Democratic mainstays, faith and flag conservatives, committed conservatives, etc. They're rated on levels of difficulty from easy to hard, depending not only on the political stance, but also on the personality of the chatbot itself. What I noticed immediately is that the demographics of the dojo were far more inclusive and representative of the rich spectrum of race in America than anything I experience in my day-to-day life, which, frankly, feels pretty functionally segregated. So I thought that was very impressive. My only whisker twitch was that I didn't see any of the so-called, quote, awfuls. Affluent white female urban liberals who are being widely castigated on social media these days precisely because they are very, very powerful drivers of political change. But who's quibbling? This was an impressive rollout. I had 3 different conversations, one with a member of the ambivalent right, one with a faith and flag conservative, and one with a member of the populist right. All were written dialogues, and the depolarizing dialogue guidance coach rated me every step of the way on their 4 areas of skill: listening, acknowledging, pivoting, and offering your perspective. So I did a few laps in increasing levels of difficulty. Not surprisingly, the chatbot felt fairly non-human because, well, it wasn't. They were really quite civil, and there wasn't the energetic subtext, the rise of energy between 2 people, even when you're trying really hard to be agreeable, you can sense more is happening beneath the surface, and it causes you to go off the rails. But still, ultimately what I noticed was this. Since the goal was not to agree, I walked away feeling dissatisfied and unsettled. I had scored high marks for being able to really listen, acknowledge, and agree where possible. I'm trained as a therapist, so this was not a surprise. I'm good at it. What I learned was that I still felt uncomfortable because I couldn't shift these folks, these personas, to my way of thinking. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely what I think Braver Angels wants us to see about ourselves. So my time in the dojo did leave me in a reflective mood. The civic change we long to see begins with us and can contribute to an era of civic renewal, one that many are saying is not only necessary, but possible. Last year, Maury Giles stepped into the role of CEO of Braver Angels, and in his inaugural speech, he reflected on how big changes can emerge from the combined efforts of ordinary people rising up in the face of crushing political pressures.
Our system feels distant, out of control, and most importantly, that it's something that we have nothing to do with. But that's absolutely not true. We will not experience change until we take accountability for the reality in front of us. It only works for the industrial outrage complex when we participate in their scheme. As Americans, more than anywhere else in the world, we have the power to shape the society we desire to live in and that we desire to leave for our children. That's not just some nice kumbaya statement. It's real. It's true. It's worth remembering this isn't the first time America's lived through such fracture. At the turn of the 20th century, the nation was convulsed by the upheavals of industrialization, mass immigration, stark inequality. Political machines and corporate monopolies dominated public life. Racial terror was codified into law in the South. Leading writers and thinkers of their time, as well as everyday citizens, worried aloud that democracy was failing, that corruption and rancor had hollowed out the civic heart of our country. Does that sound familiar to what we feel today? And yet history reminds us that that low tide did not mark the end of the American experiment. In fact, it marked the beginning of a new wave of renewal. Ordinary citizens, not elites, not politicians, not professionals, they stepped forward to build new civic institutions. The civic infrastructure that we're talking about today. Settlement houses, Rotary, the Scouts, the NAACP, 4-H, the League of Women Voters, the United Way. All of these things that we now take for granted as institutions in the United States once began as a fragile, scattered experiment after that moment in time. Critics at the time dismissed it as too small to matter. But they multiplied, they scaled, and they became the civic infrastructure that carried us forward for a century. The lesson, fragility is not failure. In fact, fragility is the natural first stage of resilience.
Fragility is the natural first stage of resilience. Reflecting on this feeling of fragility brought my mind back to Braver Angels' beginnings, right after the first election of Donald Trump, where Dave and Bill brought together the very first Braver Angels workshop cohort in a barn studio in South Lebanon, Ohio, which was filmed and made into a documentary that you can watch on their website. For one weekend, a group of self-identified Reds and Blues went through the process of listening, agreeing, acknowledging, and pivoting. At the beginning, the Blues sat on one side of the room and Reds on the other. The feeling was often tense and the viewpoints sometimes hard to listen to, but you watch these Americans get taken through layers of facilitated exercises where deep passions are expressed, held, and tolerated. By the end of the weekend, the Reds and the Blues are sitting close together, intermingled with each other, while they share their reflections on the journey. Here's just a snippet.
To be honest, I talked with each of you, before the gathering, and I was a little nervous coming into this because, I know that there's a lot of strong conviction and passion on both sides. And it was like, is the strong passion going to override the goodwill and the desire to come together? But the goodwill, it won.
I just kind of sat here and pondered, thinking about, the times that I have been one of those fire-breathing people who have contributed to the rancor and acrimony. And I'll probably, going forward, maybe handle myself just a little bit differently just because of the people I've met here and the things that we've learned together.
I'm very thankful to have participated in the group. And what impressed me the most was how thoughtful the opposing team, the blue team, was in their thoughts and how they got their points across.
Through the weekend, there were some things that took me off guard and did kind of offend me. It's okay. But I was able, I think, to have conversations with people I never would have had conversations with before. There's not one person in here I don't think is a genuine caring person.
We're all in this together. We all want the same thing. We all want a good economy. We don't want to be racist. We hate racism. We want our children, we want our families to be safe. We all want the same thing. And it's just how to get there.
We have to acknowledge other people's concerns and their complaints and understand while we may not get it and we don't agree, it's legitimate to that person. And we have to at least acknowledge that.
We talked to people this weekend. I was very, very impressed with the dynamics of that. And if you did 20,000 of these across the nation, you would change the world. I truly believe that because people are talking to people.
Communication is the universal relational solvent. It dissolves hardened boundaries. But genuine communication is a skill Braver Angels is working hard to impart within individuals, in families, in communities, in politics, and beyond. There are so many ways we can take part in civic renewal. But if the Braver Angels way calls to you, you can visit their website at braverangels.org and explore their impressive resources to build resiliency into engaging with your fellow Americans at this very challenging time in our history. As Maury Giles, the CEO of Braver Angels, asserts, coming together is our only way forward.
Gaining civic muscle in a time like this with so much pain and so much hatred is a challenge, and yet it is the only solution. Darkness never gets rid of darkness. Hate never gets rid of hate. Only light gets rid of darkness. Only love gets rid of hate.
Only love gets rid of hate. A very wise man said this to us decades ago before hatred stole his life and curtailed his work. But we can continue until love prevails. Thanks to Gabriella Kearns for sharing her knowledge and background on this important work, and thanks to Braver Angels for their permission to air portions of their videos on this show. Music was Dire Ghost from Blue Dot Sessions and Hopeful Journey from Pixabay. I am Christine Barrington. For articles, links, and podcasts to inspire and nourish your inner citizen, visit theapocalypticsupperclub.com.